The kindergarten teacher had asked all 22 children at the Father's Day picnic at Holloway Park to line up at the bench beside the rose garden when their parent or other grown-up arrived, and to take the grown-up by the hand, and to walk together up to the small wooden stage by the gazebo so that each child could say one sentence about the grown-up who had come. It was the second Sunday in June at 4 in the afternoon. The park was warm. The picnic had been organized by Holloway Elementary's PTA in its 10th consecutive year of refusing to call the event Father's Day, so that no child would be left at the bench. But every child in this year's kindergarten class who had said a grown-up was coming had brought a dad or a granddad or, in one case, an older brother on leave from the Marine Corps. Every child but one. The narration steps closer now. It rides Florence Witt. Florence Witt was 73. She had been the volunteer Sunday afternoon gardener at Holloway Park for the last 11 years. She had a steel gray bob and the steady patient face of a woman who had spent her career, before she retired, as a hospice nurse at the Regional Medical Center. She wore a faded canvas garden apron with the Holloway Garden Club's small cloth patch on the chest, and a pair of soft cotton gardening gloves, and she carried a small pair of pruning shears in the apron's hip pocket. She had been deadheading the spent bee balm at the rose garden's edge when the kindergartens had arrived, and she had stopped working because the children had started arriving, and she had sat down on the second bench from the rose garden, the bench nobody used because it was set slightly back from the path, to watch them. She had not, in 11 years of Sunday gardening, ever once been part of a children's picnic. She had not, in 12 years, been part of any picnic at all. Her husband Bram had died at 61 of a sudden cardiac event in their own kitchen on a Tuesday morning in October of 2014, 8 days after their 38th wedding anniversary. They had not had children. Florence had retired from hospice nursing the following year. She had taken up the Sunday afternoon gardening shift because the Holloway Garden Club had needed someone, and because she had needed somewhere to be on Sunday afternoons. She had not, in the 11 years since, missed a Sunday at the park. She watched the children line up at the bench by the rose garden. She watched the parents arrive. She watched the line of children dwindle to one. The one child was named Tess Booker. She was 6. She was wearing a pale yellow sundress that she had picked out herself, and a pair of small white sneakers, and a folded paper napkin in the front pocket of the dress, with a small red crayon heart at the corner that she had drawn for her father at the kitchen table that morning. She was holding in her right hand the folded paper she had been told to bring with one sentence written on it about the grown-up who was coming. The sentence was 3 words long. It said in her own careful kindergarten handwriting, "And why Dad came." Her father had not come. The narration sees what nobody at the park sees. Tess's father, Wyatt Booker, 41, a freight loader at the regional FedEx terminal in Hartfield, had been called in at noon for an emergency Sunday shift because 2 of the loaders on the regular Sunday rotation had been called out by the same stomach bug. He had not had a choice. He had texted Tess's Aunt Della at 12:15 to bring Tess to the picnic. Della had agreed. Della had then, at 1:40 in the afternoon, slipped on a step at her own front door taking out the trash and broken her right wrist, and had spent the next 2 hours at the Hartfield urgent care getting it set, and had not been able to reach Wyatt because the FedEx terminal floor did not allow personal phones. Tess had gotten to the park on her own because the picnic was 3 blocks from her front door, and she had been told she could walk it on her own this year because she was 6. She had been standing at the bench beside the rose garden for 42 minutes. She was looking polite at the row of children walking up the small wooden stage at the gazebo with their grown-ups. She was holding the folded paper. She was not crying. The kindergarten teacher, a young woman named Ms. Reyes, walked over to the bench at 4:42 and knelt down level with Tess and asked her, gentle, whether her dad was on his way. Tess said, polite, that her dad had been called to work and that her Aunt Della was going to come and that she had not seen her Aunt Della yet. Ms. Reyes said, "Sweetheart, would you like me to walk up to the gazebo with you? I can be your grown-up today." Tess thought about this for a long moment. She said, "No, thank you, Ms. Reyes." Ms. Reyes said, "Okay, sweetheart, I'll be right over here if you change your mind." She walked back to the gazebo. The narration sees what Tess does next. Tess Booker did not climb the stage. She did not cry. She did not call out for her father. She did the thing a 6-year-old does when she has been raised by a steady widowed single dad for 4 years and has been taught, without ever being told in so many words, that when a thing breaks, you fix the smallest part of it that you can fix from where you are. She looked around the rose garden. She saw the second bench. She saw the older woman sitting on it in the faded canvas garden apron, with the gardening gloves in her lap. She walked over. She stopped 2 feet from the bench. She said polite, "Hello, ma'am. May I sit down with you for a minute, please?" Florence Witt said, "Yes, sweetheart, please." Tess climbed up on the bench. She sat beside the older woman. She did not put the folded paper down. She set her small hands in her lap, the way her father set his hands in his lap when he sat on the porch step in the evening with his coffee. She said, "Ma'am, may I ask, do you have a grown-up at the picnic?" Florence Witt said polite, "No, sweetheart, I don't. I am the gardener here. I am just watching the children." Tess said, "Do you have a grown-up at home?" Florence Witt said after a long careful 3 seconds, "No, sweetheart. My husband died 12 years ago. We did not have children." Tess said, "Oh." She thought about this. She said, "Ma'am, my dad got called to work today. My Aunt Della was supposed to come, and I think something happened to my Aunt Della because she did not come either. I'm not supposed to be the only one in my class without a grown-up at the picnic. The teacher said I could walk up with her, but I think it would not feel like the right grown-up if I did that." She paused. She said, "Would you walk up with me, ma'am? You don't have one to introduce. I don't have one to introduce. We could go together." Florence Witt did not say anything for a very long moment. She said, "Level, sweetheart, I am the gardener, I am not anyone's grown-up." Tess Booker took the folded paper out of her hand and unfolded it. She showed Florence the 3 words she had written, "My dad came." She said, "Ma'am, the sentence says my dad came. The teacher said one sentence about the grown-up. It does not have to be exactly the same sentence as the one I wrote. I think the sentence can be my friend came. Would that be all right with you?" Florence Witt looked at the paper. She looked at the child. She said very quietly, "Sweetheart, it would be all right with me, yes." The narration sees what comes next. Tess Booker stood up on the bench. She held out her small right hand. She said polite, "Then please come, ma'am, the line is almost done." Florence Witt took off the gardening gloves. She set them on the bench. She took the small pair of pruning shears out of the apron's hip pocket and set them beside the gloves. She set the folded apron on the bench. She stood up. She was wearing under the apron a clean cotton cardigan and a pair of soft gray trousers and a plain white blouse with a small enameled brooch at the collar that she had not in 12 years taken off her dresser. She took Tess Booker's small hand in her own. The 2 of them walked the path from the rose garden to the small wooden stage by the gazebo. The kindergarten teacher saw them coming. The kindergarten teacher did not say a word. She did not have to. The PTA chair, a man named Otis Pham, who was running the microphone at the gazebo and who had been a friend of Wyatt Booker's at the Union Local for 9 years, saw Tess walking up the path with the gardener from the rose garden, and he saw the look on the gardener's face, and he set the microphone down on the lectern with a soft click. The gazebo went quiet. The other 21 children, and their parents and grandparents and uncles and older brothers in dress uniform, looked toward the path. Tess Booker climbed the 3 steps to the small wooden stage, with Florence Witt's hand still in her own. She stopped at the lectern. She said into the microphone, in the small clear voice of a 6-year-old who has been practicing one sentence for a week, "My friend came." She did not say anything else. She did not have to. Florence Witt, beside her on the stage, did not move her hand from the child's. She did not say anything either. She simply stood there on the small wooden stage in her cotton cardigan and her gardening trousers with a 6-year-old's hand in her own, and let the moment be what it was. The PTA chair at the side of the stage picked the microphone back up. He said polite, "Thank you, Tess, thank you, ma'am. Would you both like to come down for cake?" Tess said, "Yes, please." They came down for cake. The narration sees the rest of the afternoon fold itself into small, steady beats. Wyatt Booker arrived at the park at 5:20 in the afternoon after Della had finally reached him from the urgent care. He found Tess at the picnic table row beside the gazebo eating a slice of strawberry cake on a paper plate beside an older woman in a cotton cardigan whose name he did not yet know. He came over to the table. He knelt down beside his daughter. He said polite, "Sweetheart, I'm very sorry I was late. Are you all right?" Tess said polite, "Yes, Dad, my friend came." She introduced him to Florence Witt. Florence Witt did not say much. She said her name and her years at the park and her thanks for the cake. Wyatt Booker shook her hand. He said, "Ma'am, thank you, I am very grateful." Florence Witt said, "Mr. Booker, no thanks necessary. Your daughter saw me on a bench." The narration steps forward 6 weeks, because the niche steps when the heart is the engine and the time jump is gentle. 6 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon in late July, Florence Witt and Tess Booker and Wyatt Booker met at the Rose Garden at 4 in the afternoon and walked together to a small bakery on Holloway Avenue that Florence had not been inside since her husband had died, because Bram had loved the bakery's lemon tarts, and because Tess had asked Florence, polite at the picnic 6 weeks earlier, whether Miss Florence would maybe like to show her the bakery where Bram had liked the lemon tarts. They ordered 3 lemon tarts. They ate them at the small round table in the window. Florence did not cry. She told Tess about Bram. She told Wyatt about Bram. She told them both about the cardiac event and the kitchen and the 8 days. Wyatt told her about Marjorie, his late wife, who had died of a brain aneurysm in their own kitchen 4 years and 3 months earlier. The 3 of them sat at the small round table in the bakery window for 2.5 hours. Tess asked Florence at the end of the 2.5 hours, polite as a small judge, whether Miss Florence would like to come to her dad's pancake breakfast at their house the next Sunday. Florence looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Tess. Wyatt said, "Level, sweetheart, that's up to Ms. Witt." Florence said, "I would like that very much, Tess." Tess said, "Okay, Miss Florence, we have pancakes at 8. Florence came at 8. She came the Sunday after. She came the Sunday after that. By the 4th Sunday, Tess had stopped calling her Miss Florence at the kitchen table and had started calling her polite Miss F. By the 8th Sunday, Tess had asked Wyatt at bedtime on a Tuesday whether Miss F. could be at her elementary school open house in September. Wyatt said yes. By Halloween, Tess had introduced Florence to the 2nd grade teacher as her grandma. The teacher had not asked any questions. The teacher had simply written it down in her roster the way the teacher wrote down every grandparent the children brought. The narration steps forward a year. A year later, on a Sunday afternoon in late June, the Holloway PTA's 10th annual children's picnic in Holloway Park opened at 4 in the afternoon with 23 children lined up at the bench by the Rose Garden. One of them was Tess Booker, now 7. She was holding a folded paper with one sentence written on it. The sentence was 4 words long. It said in her own careful 1st grade handwriting, "My dad and my grandmother came." Wyatt Booker stood on her right. Florence Witt stood on her left. The 2 of them held her hands. The witness narration closes on the small bench by the Rose Garden, the bench nobody used because it was set slightly back from the path, the bench Florence Witt had sat on every Sunday afternoon for 11 years. The bench is empty now on Sunday afternoons. Florence does not sit on it. She sits on the picnic blanket beside Wyatt and Tess Booker, 3 blankets down from the gazebo, where the Holloway PTA picnic happens every 2nd Sunday in June, and the Holloway Garden Club is led by a different volunteer now, and the Rose Garden is still tended on Sunday afternoons, and the children of Holloway Elementary still line up at the bench beside the Rose Garden every year for the picnic that the PTA still refuses to call Father's Day, and there has not been. In the year since Tess Booker walked over to the 2nd bench, a single child in any of those lines who has needed to stand at the bench alone. The PTA put a small brass plaque on the 2nd bench last spring. The plaque reads in plain serif type, only what Tess wrote on the paper that afternoon, "My friend came." She still walks past the plaque every Sunday on her way to the picnic blanket. She still holds her grandmother's hand on the path. She still says polite when she stops to look at the bench, the line that Florence Witt has come to expect, "Grandma, that was the day." Florence Witt says every Sunday, "That was the day, sweetheart." They walk on to the blanket. Wyatt Booker is waiting with the lemonade. The family the bench made is the family the bench keeps.